Alright, welcome to CSS Battle Challenge 32. This is called Band-aid. We're going to try to replicate this design here on the right side with plain old HTML and CSS. So let's get started. I'm going to clean up some of these things, obviously, so we don't have all these very clutter HTML, CSS here. Removed all the comments. I'm going to get rid of this div as well because I don't really need it. So the first thing we're going to work on is just the structure of this. So how do we actually build it out? So we can do that with obviously HTML. That's the basic skeleton of the web. So we're going to try to build that out, and I'm going to go through some of the thought process of that goes on when we actually try to build it out, and then we can go ahead and try to maybe style things. I may even go back and forth just to kind of see where things go, but yeah. So let's get started. So just before I start coding, one thing I want to mention is that we notice that this is sort of this is basically like a X, right? Like a close button, but like a larger version of it. So what I am thinking is that first of all, we have this entire container here, right? And we know that this block here, this X, is basically vertically and horizontally centered. And one of the things we've really noticed with all of these CSS battles is that most of them needs to be vertically and horizontally centered. So how we do that is there's multiple ways to do it. You can either do it with grid. Flexboxes grid are usually the most common ways to do it, but a lot of the times we've found that using just absolute and relative positioning between the container and this element itself as a whole can come in really useful in this case to center things. So what I'm going to do first of all is just focus on the container itself, which is going to take the entire width and the height. I know this is a background of just white, which is fine, but in a lot of other cases it won't, right? But in this challenge, we're just going to say, you know what, we have this full container here, and that's going to just take the entire height and width of our view. So let's say this is that container, this div, and we're going to give this a class of container. Great. So now how do we actually build this out, right? Because, I mean, am I supposed to have it like a div here, div here, div here? I mean, there's just like 5 different ones. So how do we really do this, right? If you think about it, let's not focus on the like the diagonal parts as much, because that might get complicated. If you think about it, this is basically like sort of having like a cross, like a plus as opposed to like a times here, right? So let's just try to build out this part here as a whole and this part as a whole. And then we can figure out how to color this middle part in some way or form, but we'll figure that part out. But what we'll do is just try to make this part, but instead of having it diagonally, just make it like basically vertically. And same thing for this one, but we're going to try to basically lay it down in a horizontal way. So I'll just work with having a div here. So I'm going to have one div just for this part here and another div for this one. So because they're both going to be inside and somewhat in the middle of this entire container, I am going to just have 2 separate divs here. One for, let's say, I don't really know what to call this. I'm just going to call it layer 1. There's probably better ways of naming it, but I'm just going to leave it the way it is and go with that. And I'm going to call this second one layer 2. Great. And then what I can do is, I know that there is no easy way to color the middle portion of it, at least not that I know of, just on top of my head. So what I'm going to do is just create another div that will just sit in the center, basically. So we'll have one full div, right? Sorry. So one full layer, one here, and another layer here that will probably just sit underneath it, so to speak. and we're going to have another square layer. So I'm going to call this div here again, and so we'll have, let's say, a square layer. Yeah, layer square or something, right? Something like that. Okay, great. Um, I think that sort of covers the basic skeleton of it. I don't think there's anything else that you really need to do, right? There's no other elements. I think this three div should cover all three of those of our cases here. So that's really it for this HTML part of it. Now let's dive into the actual styling part of things. So again, I'm going to target the container first to make sure that this takes up the entire width and the entire height. So I'm going to say, here's my class called container. Just temporarily, I'm going to give this a separate background than white, so it'll be a little bit easier to kind of differentiate it. I'm going to give it a background of, let's say, light green. And obviously you can't really see anything because there's no height or width. Can you do light green? Is that even a color? I think it's a color. Width, we're going to give 100 v width, so it takes up the entire width of the container, and same thing for our height, 100 view height. Here you can see it has some maybe padding or margin issues. That's why you're seeing some layer of white on the corners here, on the borders. So what I tend to do for these is to just target body and all the elements inside it. Actually, you can probably just do body, comma, and all this content inside it, and give it a padding of 0. So it basically resets all the default padding and margin that is given by the browser to a lot of these elements as defaults. So I'm going to set these to 0. And as you can see, that goes away. And I'm also going to add border, I think box sizing, border box, I think. I think box sizing, is it? Oh, box sizing, border box. Okay. Great. So now that the container is done, now let's focus on the actual layers. So we're just gonna say again, let's assume that we're gonna build this part out here. So it's like a rectangular shape. I don't know the height or width, but let's just take a quick guess and we can work from there. So I'm going to give this layer 1 a width of, let's say, I don't know, 25 pixels maybe, and a height of, let's say, 100 pixels. I just want to see how that looks. And I'm going to give this a background of this color here. So choose the color. There it is. And so we can see that here. Maybe it's a little bit more. So let's give it a maybe 50 width. I think maybe not even, maybe 40. Maybe. I don't know. And this is probably going to be like 125 perhaps. I don't know yet. But let's say this is somewhat what we want, but as you can see, it's actually here, right? We don't really want that, right? How do we actually center this? So to make sure that we can center things properly, what we need to do is take this layer 1 and sort of have a parent-child relationship between the container and itself, right? Right now it is layering inside the container because, you know, in the HTML it's rendering inside it, but we still need to vertically center it. And to do that, what we can do is give this the container of position relative, and we're going to give this layer 1 a position absolute. And now the width and the height, or basically the positioning of layer 1, will be basically relative to what the entire container is. So, and because we give this an absolute position, we can use top, left, bottom, right properties to position things, you know, the way that we want it to. So we're going to say, hey, from the top, I want you to take 50% space. So basically move that down 50%. And I want you to move left 50%. So it is somewhat in the center. Obviously it's not quite in the center, but like you can see, like this point here is actually vertically and horizontally centered. So to position that correctly, what we need to do is use this transform translate property to say, hey, I want you to basically center it from taking the middle point of this element as opposed to the top left corner of it. So we want to say, hey, I want you to move that negative 50% in the x-axis, I believe, and then also same thing for our y-axis. So as you can see, now it's vertically centered. Maybe the width and height is still not quite matching, so I think I want to say maybe 50 pixels is the width, and height is probably 150. Oops, not that much. 150. That probably looks reasonable. I still don't know yet because this is like vertically centered and this was diagonally, so we'll come back to it again. Now we'll do the same thing for the green layer, right? So actually, maybe that's the proper name we should have used. But you know what? I'm gonna keep it the way it is. Keep things simple for now. I'm gonna do the same thing that we did for layer 1 for layer 2, but with a different color. It may be difficult to see because one will be sort of overlapping on top of another, but we'll come back to that. So I'm going to copy this and paste it just like that. But I'm going to switch first of all, let's switch the color. So maybe we'll just see it first. Actually, you might not see it. Yeah, it's going to like just basically sit right on top of it, which is fine for now. But what we can do is that instead of, basically positioning it vertically, we're just going to make sure that it renders horizontally. So it's a little bit easier to kind of differentiate the two different layers. So what we can do, we can just switch the height and the width, right, in this case. So the width, we want actually 150 pixels. And the height should be actually 25 pixels. Oh, sorry, 50 pixels. Right there. There we go. So now we have this plus sign, basically, as opposed to this times. It looks like maybe... So what we can do, so yeah, you can see like, I don't know if you guys can see the shadow in the video, but you can see like the width might be a little bit bigger than 150. I'm going to say maybe 175, maybe. I don't know. We'll just work with that. That looks more reasonable to me, I think. We'll figure things out. Okay, so now let's work on, you know what? I'm going to come back to this square part a little bit later because we can figure out just the positioning of this X first, and then we'll come back to, just coloring this part later. So how do we actually make sure that this actually now rotates a bit, right? That's the whole idea here. So one thing you could do, so what I'm thinking might be useful is to actually have another div that will control this entire container inside that, right? So what it will do is basically imagine there's this larger container here, and we'll have another container that'll have a border, they'll basically be just right around the entire all these 3 blocks or these 2 layers. But the reason why we would want to do that is because we can just adjust some sort of rotation to that element itself, as opposed to adding different sort of rotations and transforms to each element, right? So that's the whole idea. But maybe we don't really have to do that. What we could do is let's just try out adjusting the transform rotate properties for layer 1 first. So we have obviously used this transform and we have repositioned it a little bit. But what we can do, I think, is also use a rotate of, you can do like 45 degrees. I think that usually does something. See right there? Oh, look at that. I think we're going to keep it like this because this actually might work out really well. So we can see this is actually already positioned pretty nicely, but it seems like the height might be a little bit bigger than we thought. This might actually be maybe 180 pixels. No, maybe 190. Not even 195. 200. Oh, look at that. It is 200 pixels. Okay. So, actually maybe, oh, okay, so it's 50 by 200. Good to know. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing for layer 2. I'm going to say this is a width of 200. but again, we need to make sure this one is also rotated a little bit. One thing I just noticed is that this one, the YOLO layer, is actually the one that's diagonally positioned, but not on the right, but like it's like this. So what we can do is we're just gonna rotate this maybe -45. Look at that. That is exactly what we want. Great. We're gonna do the same thing for our layer 2. So I'm gonna copy and paste this entire thing, but as opposed to using -45 degrees, we're gonna use 45. And what happened? Oh, did I use the same color maybe? No, color is different. So if I do like 20, what happens? Okay, so maybe we need to do maybe 45. That's what we did. Oh, I don't know what happened. Anyway, okay, so that one is, I think this is fine. So this is exactly what we want. So great. I'm gonna get rid of the background color so it'd be a little bit easier to kind of really see the whole thing for the container. So get rid of the background color. We have the white background color and everything looks pretty much matches exactly except this circular block. Sorry, this square block here, which again, we already know how to build the layers. So all we have to do is copy this class here and add in one other one here. Oops, sorry, not in here, right outside. And we're gonna say this is a width of, I wanna say 50 pixels maybe, and a height of 50 pixels because it's a square. And we're gonna give it a background color of this. Great, now it's positioned here. All we have to do is make sure it is vertically and horizontally centered. How do we do that? Well, we have been doing that for all the other elements. So we're going to give this a position of absolute. And we're going to say, hey, from the top, do 50% here. From the left, 50%. And then transform is going to be translate -50% and -50%. And we also have to make sure it's diagonally, it's diagonal as opposed to like sitting like this. So how do we do that? Again, we use the rotate functionality here. Oops, sorry, can't type. 45 degrees. Oh, sorry, degrees. There we go. All right, look at that. I think this message is exactly how we want it. All right, I think that covers our battle band-aid. So as you can see, we have, again, three separate childs here, right, inside the container. And we have obviously used relative and absolute positioning to layer these elements properly and make sure there's a clear relationship between the container and the layers themselves. Obviously, height, width, everything is good, but the main key here is we've used this transform property to make sure that, hey, it is not just positioned correctly, but it's also rotated properly so it matches our design here. So that is how you would build Band-Aid. All right. See you guys.